Good afternoon. My name is Marcin Kołakowski, and I am the Vice President for Medicinal Products of the Polish Office for Registration of Medicinal Products, Medical Devices, and Biological Products. On behalf of the EU Polish Presidency, it's my pleasure to welcome representatives from patients and healthcare professional organizations, scientific societies, industry, academia, regulators, and other health-related decision makers to this multi-stakeholder webinar. The European Medicines Agency's network strategy to 2028, promoting public health at the time of rapid change, represent a comprehensive review and update to the original EMANS 2025 framework, responding to changes in the regulatory and technological landscape, some more rapidly than anticipated. EMANS 2028 is forward-looking and will guide the network as it seizes opportunities and meets the challenges for the near future, including preparing for and responding to public health emergencies and threats such as antimicrobial resistance. The strategy also takes into account new trends and developments in artificial intelligence, innovation, competitiveness, and the growing importance of collaboration with international partners. Also importantly, EMAS 2028 aligns with the ongoing work to review EU's pharmaceutical legislation. Strategy has been developed with input from experts from across the EU Medicines Regulatory Network, and throughout the process we have listened to our stakeholders. The strategy was published for an 8-week public consultations in November 2004, and today's event is designated to present how the feedback received during this consultation phase has been incorporated into the draft and to clarify further input before its final acceptance. Thank you for your participation, which shows our common commitment to support the implementation of the strategic objectives set up in this document. It is now my pleasure to introduce the HMA and EMA leads to the EMANS 2028, and who will be also the moderators of today's sessions. From the heads of Medicines Agency, we have Rui Santos Ivo, head of the National Authority of Medicines and Health Products in Portugal, and Thomas Heberer, head of the Department of the Federal Office and Customer Protection and Food Safety, responsible for the authorization of and registration of veterinary medicinal products in Germany. From the European Medicines Agency, we have Melanie Carr, head of Stakeholders and Communication, and Michael Lenihan, head of Strategic Planning and Governance. Melanie, over to you.
Thank you, Marcin, and good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this webinar. So before we start, I have a few practical housekeeping notes relating to the running of the webinar. So participants, you can raise your virtual hand in WebEx. The button is by your name. By default, all participants are muted upon entry. You will be able to mute and unmute yourself, and we will be delighted to see you on camera. You can also send your comments or questions in the chat. However, we would encourage an interactive discussion. So if you could raise your hand and ask your question directly, if possible, that would be great. The chat box will be disabled during presentations and enabled during the Q&A sessions. So please be mindful, we are also broadcasting this webinar. So when you're given the floor, please state your name and affiliation. The meeting is also being recorded and will be published on EMA's YouTube channel and website afterwards. I'd now like to give the floor to Rui Santos Ivo and Michael Lenihan for an introduction to EMANS 2028 and an overview of the stakeholder feedback received. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melanie. Also, I'd like to say good afternoon to all of you. So I will start with the introduction on the strategy, and I will give first some characterization of the process of the strategy. So this is a joint activity between the national competent authorities and the European Medicines Agency. We are referring to a comprehensive update of the originally EMANS strategy to 2025, a high-level strategy developed with the input from experts from across the network, and that was also complemented with a detailed reflection paper. This strategy replaces EMANS to 2025, and it's also including strategic aspects of the EMA's regulatory science strategy. It is a forward-looking and streamlined strategy that will guide the EU medicines regulatory network as it's seizing the opportunities and meeting also the future challenges. And also, as has been also mentioned by Marcin, it aligns with the EU's ongoing extensive revision of the pharmaceutical legislation, and it lays the groundwork for the implementation of the legislation. Just to recall the role that we have that we had until the moment where we are now, so to prepare this document of the EMANS 2028. So this started already with the midpoint report in December 2023. Then we proceed with the review of the strategic themes of the strategy in the beginning of last year. And then we moved into drafting the EMANS 2028, and we have also prepared a reflection paper during the first 3 quarters of 2024. As has been mentioned already, we had a public consultation at the end of last year that was occurring between the beginning of October and the end of November 2024, and then it was followed by the analysis of the various contributions that we have received. This was done during December 2024 and January 2025, and it brings us to the stakeholder webinar that we are holding today under the Polish presidency of the EU. I also would like to remind us about the strategic focus areas that we have included in the strategy, the teams that will be framing this document, and they were revised from the previous one. So the first focus area will be accessibility. Then we have one important topic on leveraging data, visualization, and artificial intelligence. A third topic is dealing with regulatory science, innovation, and competitiveness. We have team 4, which is focused on antimicrobial resistance and other health threats. And we have topic 5 that was resulting from previously other topics. So we have now availability and supply chain together in topic 5. And finally, we have topic 6, which is directed to the sustainability of the network that is in charge of implementing the strategy. So these are the 6 topics for the strategy 2028. I would also like now to look into the responses that we have received during the consultation, to highlight here the different responses we got from the various stakeholders, also that were mentioned by Marcin in the introduction. I would like to acknowledge the high level of response that we have received, and to thank all these contributions that are essential to get a strategy that is aligned with all those involved. But here to characterize the different groups of responses, so we had 24 responses from the industry stakeholders. We had 20 responses from the public and from patient and the consumer organizations. Also 20 contributions from healthcare professionals. And we had also a number of responses, 10 from research organizations. Also, additional contributions from the public institutions. Of course, many or most of them were involved in the process. So with this slide, I will now hand over to Michael. Michael, please.
Rui, thank you very much indeed, and good afternoon, everybody. So indeed, before moving to look in detail at each theme area, perhaps just a few slides to give a flavor of the overall impression and feedback on the strategy. So Rui has already mentioned 77 responses received across all of the different theme areas. And if we just look on the left-hand side, we can see, if we look at it in terms of, let's say, relevant areas of interest, we see that 62 of those responses were focused on human-only related themes and topics. 7 of them were really relevant across both the human and veterinary domains, and we had 8 responses which were focused mainly on the veterinary area. And if you look at the graphic on the right-hand side of the screen, here we have tried to represent a little bit the overall impression of the feedback received across all of those inputs. Ranging on a scale from negative, which is where you would see shown in red, to overall neutral responses, let's say, regarding the overall strategy, where you can see in yellow, moving on to light green, where the responses were considered positive, and dark green for very positive type of responses. So you can see we got a broad range of responses indeed across from all of the clusters groups. So thank you very much for that. We're very happy and very important to see all types of responses, but we were relatively pleased and satisfied to see, as you can see represented here, the overall responses were broadly ranging from neutral to positive or to very important. Looking in a little bit more detail, just moving to the next slide. Here, what we've tried to do, and colleagues, please consider this as a kind of heat map rather than a detailed deep dive on all of the figures. But here we have tried to give a reflection on the comparison on the feedback across all of the goals in each theme area per cluster. So on the left-hand side, you see theme 1, goal 2, theme 2, etc., etc. And across the screen, you see the level of responses from each of the cluster groups that Rui has already referred to. The scale was on a scale of 1, which would be not important, considered not important value, to a maximum score of 5, which would be scored as very important. And excuse me. And as you can see, colleagues, across broadly across each of the clusters and all of the themes, we are seeing quite high scores. And indeed, in each cluster, we have looked at the mean level of response for each of those individual clusters. And then on the very right-hand side, we can see the overall mean score, which, as you can see, for all of the themes and all of the goals, comes out in between the range of between 4, which was important, and 5 for very important. So again, rather reassuring level of response in that respect. Looking at that from a slightly different perspective and perhaps a little bit more visually for you, we've equally just mapped again on a scale of 1 to 5, and again looking at each theme and each goal, where each of the individual responses have come out, and the overall line running through that level of responses. And what we can see here again is that all responses, so the averages, the mean coming across for all responses, sits firmly within the range between important to very important, with just a few responses just in between important and moderately important. So again, just another way of reflecting the fact that overall feedback shows that in terms of relevance, both the themes and the goals in the themes seemed to be quite relevant. Last slide, I think, from my side would be the next one. We've also asked, and thank you very much to all who responded for input regarding the objectives per strategic theme area. As you know, we have themes, we have goals, and we have objectives within each theme. We received many comments indeed relating to the objectives. And here what you can see on the screen is just how those responses and inputs came to us across the different cluster groups. So just to take an example of the first, the left-hand side, it's on the theme of accessibility. And starting from the bottom, you can see that there were a number of responses from cluster 1 in blue, in light blue, let's say, in cluster 2 in yellow, in cluster 3. There were no responses on accessibility from cluster 4 from the institutions. But if you look at the second bar, we can see second and third bar, we can see those responses there. And cluster 5, the industry responses, you can see in orange on top of the screen. So again, I guess the key message I would say taking from this slide is thank you so much for the responses, a broad range of responses across all themes and from all areas of stakeholder interest. And so very, very good and important information for us. And indeed, you will see as the colleagues go through the slides at the later stage how we have responded to each of those comments. With that, I think I would hand back, please, to Rui, just perhaps to give us some general comments that were received, perhaps not linked to individual themes, but broader comments. So, Rui, if I may pass back to you. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Michael. Yes, I will conclude by referring to some general comments, as Michael was saying, that are not necessarily linked to the individual themes. So some of the comments that could identify potential changes to the overall narrative of the strategy, and these were regarding the position on health as a general topic across all the different topic areas. Also, the emphasis on both human and veterinary medicines, and there were also a number of considerations dealing with cross-sectoral legislation and other initiatives, such as concerning the environment or the single assessment of substances. So these were a number of general comments, and this will, in some way, will be reflected in the final text of the document that we will finalize. There were some other general comments that were coming in from different stakeholders, and I would like also to mention them. So regarding the extensive engagement with stakeholders, which we believe is already reflected in the strategy. Also the issue of covering the pediatric population, which is included, and of course it's already part that there should be support, or there should be a further update once the revision of the pharmaceutical legislation is concluded. So with this final notes, we conclude the introduction of the strategy, and so I would like again to thank you all for the contributions, and I will now give the floor to Thomas Everett and then Melanie Carr, who will moderate the first session that will be covering themes 1 to 3. Melanie.
Thank you very much, Rui. And I'm going to pass the floor to Thomas to introduce our speakers for themes 1 to 3. Over to you, Thomas. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melanie, and thank you so much again for all of you joining us today, and also for your responses, which were pretty much welcome. And we are very happy that we're going to, of course, address all your comments and probably also other comments given today. So the first session comprises of the first 3 topics that we have. First is accessibility, facilitating access to medicines in the EU. This is presented by Michael Berggren. Number 2 is leveraging data, digitalization, artificial intelligence, improving decision-making, optimizing processes, and increasing efficiency, presented by Peter Arlett. And number 3 is regulatory science, innovation, and competitiveness, helping improve innovation and competitiveness in the EU healthcare sector, going to be presented by Joana Nuevo. And so I'd like to ask first Michael to start with his presentation and hand over to Peter afterwards. Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you, Thomas, and good afternoon to all participants of this workshop here today. It's a true pleasure to guide you through the responses and feedback we have received on theme number 1, accessibility. I'm doing this on behalf of the EMA HMA team behind this drafting, and on the HMA side, this team is led by my colleague Audun Haga. So this being said, let me briefly remind ourselves of the scope of this particular theme here. And that's to do with the fact that a medicine, when it becomes accessible to patients, when it has gone through the necessary steps of regulatory review, but later also reimbursement into healthcare systems. So it needs to be authorized by regulators, then also being positively assessed by, for example, health technology assessment bodies, and later also appraised by payers. And this already indicates that what the regulatory network strategy here is aiming to do is to facilitate the path towards accessibility. And one way here is to ensure that the evidence generated throughout the life cycle is relevant for the different decision makers. But it's also important to ensure that what comes out of regulatory reviews is well communicated. And these are themes which you can find also described in the introduction to this. Let me also just clarify from the outset one terminology, and this is about the difference between accessibility and availability, which we applied in the strategy. You will see also here in the draft, which was put out for consultation, that these concepts are very closely related. The way we interpret these terms in the strategy here is that availability is to do with marketing the product, manufacturing the product, and make it available on the market in sufficient quantities. And therefore, you will hear all about this later in theme number 5. So now we're turning to accessibility within the definition we put forward in the strategy. And it has really been very exciting to see the various comments received, and a big thank you to all the stakeholders who have put a lot of effort in putting this feedback here together. It was also very positive, the feedback, and therefore very encouraging for us to move forward accordingly. You see here the general considerations which we had from the comments. The first one, when it was about the potential changes to the goals, objectives, and the narrative of the strategy, there were 2 points which were coming out of this review, which is the first one, that there should be sufficient clarity of the separation of remits between regulators and HTA bodies. That was something which came through really through a number of comments. And the second one is to provide emphasis on both innovative and off-patent medicines being subject to enhanced communication, other activities to support accessibility. And therefore, we will make changes in the respective descriptions of the strategy here. When it there comes more to more details which can be included in the implementation actions, you see here a couple of points which are very helpful again for us. The first one, to consider the relevance of expedited pathways for faster access to priority medicines, like the regulatory pathways we are having, and to review them carefully. State-of-the-art communications with patients and healthcare professionals, guidance and public awareness of complex generics and biosimilars, the needs to consider the specifics of pediatric medicines. Again, it was one of these high-level comments mentioned previously already. The impact of accessibility on health outcomes overall to be looked at, as well as the accessibility challenges of repurposed medicines. So these are points which we suggest taking up in the implementation actions, and they are really highly relevant for the development of the follow-up to this strategy, the goals and the objectives. Now let's move more and look at more detail into the various goals. We had two goals proposed here. The first one, goal number 1, was written as to optimize the path to accessibility by working with other decision makers, HTA bodies, and payers. And we have put forward 3 objectives to contribute to the successful implementation of the HTA regulation, to foster the generation of robust scientific evidence to serve different decision makers, as well as enhancing communication with other decision makers about the scientific considerations leading to regulatory outcomes. Altogether, we could see that there was a very high appreciation of this goal, and we had 94% of the respondents valuing this goal as important or even very important, which was, of course, a very good figure here. Now, in more detail, when we then look at the comments we received and that we would like to see translated in the implementation actions, I should say here these are the descriptions of the comments in a summarized way. It's not the actual language later for the actions that we propose, but it's really just to give a flavor of the comments we would like to translate into these implementation actions. The first one, to cooperate with healthcare professionals, patients, and other stakeholders for the successful implementation of the regulation, of course. Then to better integrate different types of evidence needs and different methodologies. So there was a very strong call for this. To have appropriate and manageable data requirements, and also the notion that the data generation is a responsibility of the developer. The strengthening of transparency on evidence that is supporting regulatory decisions, early interactions also for off-patent medicines, and to contextualize regulatory and HTA outcomes with a focus on information that needs to be exchanged between regulators and HTAs. So all of these pointers are really, really important for us in the next step to be translated into implementation actions. There were also a couple of other comments which we have seen. This being a regulatory agency strategy, some of the comments that we received on the strategy were considered out of the remit of the medicines agency. This doesn't mean that these comments are not important. It only means that they cannot be taken up in this particular strategy. And I just summarized them here on this slide on the left-hand side. The first one being the involvement of stakeholders and other partners in the HTA process, the legal obligations for product launch and engaging in pricing reimbursement processes, the operational steps of the HTA processes according to the HTA regulation implementing acts, such as the PICO process, imposition of evidence requirements outside the needs for regulatory decision and supervision, and also an opt-out for known substances from the HTA regulation. So these were certainly noted, but again, for the concept of the EMANS, the regulatory network strategy, considered out of scope. Other comments which you will see reflected in other themes. The first one, the collaboration with HTA bodies, payers, to extend this also to NITACs. You will hear something about this in other themes. The horizon scanning to also cover off-patent developments. Again, horizon scanning is covered by a different theme. And then we also have avoidance of overly restrictive evidence requirements, which was a notion here, which of course will be translated into the activities around what is the robustness of evidence, how to manage uncertainties, and therefore would be an outcome of certain discussions to be held. But this is really just to give a flavor of what we've seen in this theme, and which again gives us a lot of input also for the next steps. Now, turning to the second goal and rehearsing here briefly, this one about engagement with policymakers. We formulated here to deepen engagement with healthcare policymakers on initiatives and research relevant to sustain health technology accessibility. And there were again 3 objectives, which you find here on the slide, to contribute to initiatives exploring the perspective different stakeholders have about unmet medical needs and how they inform considerations about clinical significance, significant benefit, and major contribution to patient care. Then an objective around the conduct of research to better understand accessibility for medicines addressing unmet needs and how evidence requirements affect different decision-making across that chain. And the third one was around continuing collaborative work on methodologies for generation of evidence that's also relevant for health technology assessment. Looking at this goal and the overall rating by the stakeholders who provided feedback, we had an 80% of ratings of this goal being important or even very important. All patient, consumer, participants as well as academia rated this as very important or important. There were some general points raised by developers around the separation of remits and the potential concern about increase of evidence standards. So let's look at the comments in more detail and how we consider them for the implementing actions. And again, this is a summary here and not a concrete wording for the eventual actions. There's a need for multi-stakeholder discussion on scientifically sound recognition of unmet medical needs with the aim to foster innovation and better accessibility. There was a call to develop metrics for comparison of accessibility, including the impact of early access schemes. So you could see that narrative going through. There was a particular focus on patient involvement, prioritization of and guidance on patient experience data, promoting public trust in biosimilar medicines, exploring commonalities on methodologies such as patient experience data, novel clinical trial designs and endpoints without forcing alignment, using all available sources of evidence on accessibility, explain uncertainty management and risk acceptance, as well as attention to rare diseases, pediatric medicines, and other specific areas. So again, here it is the comments that we received, which we will look at and consider for the actual implementing actions. There were a few comments which we could see outside the remit of medicines agencies. The first one about purely economic and pricing considerations. Then also fostering competitiveness through the HTA regulation implementation, as well as the inequality in access across countries. And again, these are only listed here as being out of scope for the medicines regulatory strategy, not by any means saying that they are not important topics to be addressed. Another comments which we also received was the need for multi-stakeholder discussion on the concept of innovation. And again, we have a different theme here. And the challenges of horizontal legislation were already mentioned in the introductory presentation by Rui Santos. So all this being said here on theme number 1, again, many thanks for the numerous comments we have received. They really helped us to refine the wording of the goals and objectives, but in particular also help us to guide the development of the activities and actions in order to bring those objectives to life. It's very encouraging to see the positive feedback and the positive resonance, because ultimately there's so many stakeholders working on this and we are all in this together. With this being said, I would like to hand over to my colleague, Peter Arlett. Thank you.
Hi, colleagues. Thank you, Michael. It's my privilege to present to you some of the feedback we've received on theme 2, leveraging data, digitalization, and artificial intelligence. And I'm just going to read out the bit of text below that because it sets out the objective of this theme, and that's to improve decision-making, optimize processes, and increase efficiency. Before I get into the meat of the presentation, I'd like to acknowledge the co-leads here, Carl Broisch, President of BFARM, Zaida Frias, Head of the Digitalization Task Force at EMA, and also acknowledge the team that have analysed the results, and call out Francois Domergue, who has in particular supported this process for theme 2. Thank you very much, colleagues. If we go to the next slide. So this slide summarizes feedback we've received from stakeholders which apply across the theme, so aren't specific to one of the 3 goals within it. And I'll just walk you through. So firstly, potential changes to the goals, objectives, or narratives of the strategy. So these were considerations or comments from stakeholders we felt might potentially touch on the goals and objectives or the narrative of the strategy. Firstly, to reinforce the critical importance of personal data protection. Secondly, to reinforce the links to the European health data space. Clearly, when the draft strategy document went out for public consultation, the piece of legislation was not yet considered final. Our understanding of the decision making now in the Council is that the legislation on the European health data space is now ready for publication, and so obviously we will need to focus in our strategy on data, digitalization and AI, on supporting the EHDS and ensuring compliance with it where appropriate. A number of comments about so-called SPOR master data, so substance, product, organizations, referentials. These are the core building blocks of data in medicines regulation, and a particular emphasis on product master data, so-called PMS. And that this should be elevated and given prominence in the strategy. We think we will take that on board and give a significant prominence to master data in the final version of the strategy. And finally, the electronic product information was highlighted by stakeholders as being very impactful on stakeholders and therefore warranting greater emphasis in the strategy. Finally, cybersecurity, a bit like data protection, is a critical governance building block, managing data safely and ethically. If we then move on to the right-hand side of the slide, we have clustered a number of general considerations that we consider are not necessarily appropriate to go directly into the strategy document, but may very well be included in implementation actions, which will obviously be the next step of this work after the adoption of the strategy itself. So first, and maybe the first bullet point isn't a consideration as such, it's a methodology almost, it's an approach. So many of you will be aware that at the end of 2024, the heads of medicines agencies and then subsequently the EMA Management Board endorsed a mandate for a new HMA-EMA network data steering group. And this essentially is a merge of what was the big data steering group, which focused more on healthcare data and analytics, and the network data board that focused more on data strategy and master data. And so this new network governance body will cover all data essentially and be a network data board. Why do I emphasize the point? Because we intend that network data steering group will be a key vehicle for putting in place implementation actions from the strategy, not exclusive to Theme 2, but particularly focused on implementing Theme 2. So some of the considerations that will also feed into implementation actions are to, what it says here is develop data exchange mechanisms with data providers. I think this was particularly in the context of the European health data space when you read the detail of the comments that came through. That we should promote adoption of digital tools by stakeholders, so very much an outreach approach, working in partnership with stakeholders and digital tools being adopted and used together, if you like. We should enhance services to stakeholders, so maybe the regulator having a digital service culture towards its stakeholders and key users. That we should ensure that our implementation of the strategy has a global perspective and that we are converging or even harmonizing with international partners where possible. That we should see the implementation as including training, sharing of best practices, so very much a change management approach. And I think with any new approach, any transformation, any rollout of new technology, we need to have a change management arm to that. Rather than just delivering a tool, if you like. And then the SPOR master data that I mentioned, that it might actually touch on the goals, it certainly will be featuring in the implementation actions. There will be a suite of actions relating, for example, to product master data in 2025, 2026 and beyond, because these are our key data building blocks. Let's go to the next slide. So if the previous slide was general considerations, we're now going to have a look at goal 1, data for decision making. And so on the left-hand side of the slide, it reiterates the goal. So what is goal 1? Goal 1 is to maximize the generation, interoperability, use, and exchange of data to support EU decision making. And then if we go to the right-hand side of the slide, it tells you the 2 objectives. So firstly, to embed the use of EU healthcare data from diverse populations in the network's processes and pilot the use of novel types of data. And there are examples given as synthetic data, patient experience data, or data from personalized medicines. And then the second objective is to ensure a high level of interoperability, standardization, and quality of data, addressing potential biases and ethical considerations, and ensure that the network data assets are appropriately managed. So very much strategy, quality, and governance, if you like. If we then have a look at go to the next slide, and have a look at the comments that are most related to goal 1. So this was the healthcare data one, and these are areas where we will consider the comments for some of the implementation actions. So firstly, to develop guidance and provide clarity on the required quality, as well as access and use of data and evidence generation. So this is a very broad comment, actually, but I understand that across the life cycle of collecting data, managing data, analyzing data, and then and its integration within the collective evidence that feeds a decision, there's a need from stakeholders for guidance. So I think that's how I interpret that body of feedback that we've had. Comments about the European health data space and supporting it, as well as other EC legislative initiatives. Maybe I can take this opportunity to mention that we have strong European Commission, as well as health data access body, as well as the leader of TEDAS, which is the joint action towards the European health data space, all on the network data steering group. So it is foreseen that European health data space implementation will be an important part where the regulators will try and support where appropriate. Maybe just to elaborate on that a little bit more, for cross-border healthcare, we believe that product master data will be a critical enabler. We've already got a medicines regulatory data quality framework, which we believe is an important input to cross-border healthcare work in the European health data space. We have the HMA, EMA catalogues of real-world data sources and studies. We're collaborating already with the Quantum project, which is about the quality label under the European health data space, as well as the TEDAS TEDAS 2 joint action, which is developing guidelines and technical specs for the implementation of the EHDS. So sorry, a bit of detail there, but I think it's important to reflect what's already in flight. Develop a comprehensive strategy on the use of data, including synthetic data. Again, it's not a pre-announcement, but because it's not yet adopted, but there's been a lot of discussion at the Network Data Steering Group about having a data analytics strategy for the network. And I think it's likely that that will be an action going forward. Then there's points about different types of use of medicines, or so over-the-counter medicines, and then different types of data, patient experience data, and embracing these different use cases, different types of medicine, different types of data. Interesting suggestion on centers of excellence for novel data types. I would understand that we might want to consider either an academic group or even a national competent authority as being a lead or a service provider on, for example, patient experience data, or interpretation of data on over-the-counter medicines, for example. I think that's the feedback we've received, and it's certainly an interesting idea that needs to be considered. If we move to the right-hand side of the slide, include diverse populations and types of evidence, and ensure accurate representation and bias avoidance. So those are almost two separate comments merged into one, if you like, but diversity of population and diversity of types of evidence, obviously, if managed and interpreted with skill, can add to the scope of use cases where real-world evidence can support decision-making, and also the external validity, if you like, of results, because you're having data from the diversity of populations. Bias avoidance is a particular methodological point
as well as a question of the scope of data collection, if you like. Consider implications of data use on off-patent medicines has come up again, and I think it's clear that we do have opportunities for better use of healthcare data as well as clinical trials data across the spectrum of medicines and the whole life cycle of medicines. So that would obviously include well-established medicines, off-patent medicines. There's a need for appropriate data management, and I would add in the word governance, and it comes back to the general considerations about data protection, data security, and dare I say ethics as well, being critical building blocks. And I totally agree that this will boost confidence and is important for trust of patients, for trust of society at large. The ethical standards there is mentioned. And finally, FAIR principles getting a mention. So being a critical way of ensuring interoperability. Let's go to the next slide. A couple more comments on goal 1. So the EHDS again. Now this says outside the remit of medicines agencies, but I think whereas it might be formally, implementation is not our legal responsibility. Medicines regulatory authorities, as I preempted in the previous slide, clearly do have a role, a supportive role, and a lot of experience that they can share, particularly with the use of secondary use of healthcare data. If we could move to the right-hand side of the slide, an important point about evidentiary standards and also being cognizant of the limitations of different types of data. I understand this in part is about the balance between clinical trials and real-world evidence. And I think it is fair to say, having been involved in many, many discussions with the decision-making committees like CHMP, PRAC, and so on, that the use of real-world evidence is seen as a complement to clinical trials and not a replacement. And we hope that the use of real-world evidence can actually drive up, in a way, the evidence standards, because it can answer questions that clinical trials cannot. So I think the point is well taken. Protect intellectual property and commercial data. I mean, this is a legal obligation, so it's important to acknowledge that. And maintain the last point, maintain the responsibility of the applicant for data and evidence generation. It is absolutely critical to remember that the marketing authorization applicant or the marketing authorization holder will always be the principal source of evidence on the safety, quality, efficacy, and benefit risk balance of their products. Let's go to the next slide. So we move to goal 2 of this theme, and goal 2 is to leverage digitalization, experimentation and innovation to deliver optimized regulatory processes. If you look at the right-hand side of the slide, you can see the 2 objectives underneath this goal: to reinforce the network's digital infrastructure in line with the network portfolio vision, to drive the digital transformation of the network's scientific and regulatory processes, digital transformation. And the last objective under this goal: foster a culture of continuous experimentation and innovation across the network. If we then go to the next slide, we dig down into some general, some considerations that have come from stakeholders, which we will give very careful consideration to in terms of implementation actions. So we always need to consider resource implications, not just how much does it cost the regulatory agencies to implement, but how much does embracing a new digital approach cost or potentially save stakeholders. We should strengthen digital infrastructure at EU level. That's clearly been our goal for a long time. Ensure transparency and sharing of learnings. Consider the predictability of digital upgrades to allow stakeholders to prepare. I think this is an important point. Clearly, if we are expecting a large group of potentially diverse stakeholders, like the pharmaceutical industry or clinical trial sponsors or whichever group we're considering, they will have different capability and capacity to make change, and therefore we need to give a good lead time and support with communication and potentially training at the appropriate moment. Work on eliminating duplications and towards more integrated systems for optimizing efficiency and seamless integration. What a lot of words. I looked at the original comments behind that, and what seemed to be driving it was dual submission of master data by the pharmaceutical industry, particularly a submission under Article 57 to the in the format of the Extended EU Revisions Medicinal Product Dictionary. as well as submission under PMS in the ISO compatible format. I think it is fair to say we've had recent discussions at the Network Data Steering Group. The regulatory optimization group, also under HMA and EMA, is also looking at how can we have a single submission of master product data by the industry, and then make this more efficient. And so watch this space. It will definitely be in the actions. Digital technology for authoring, submission, and assessment. So, all the different steps in the regulatory core business process. Engage with stakeholders for implementation. So I guess that means a two-way dialogue. Understand your stakeholders, understand their needs, their capacity, their capability. Be open to participate with different partners, I guess, including technology partners. Implement the tools and solutions with the aim of avoiding delays to innovation and to spare resources. I have to say it's very important, and I think it's front of our thinking as regulators, that technology should be delivering efficiencies. It should also be supporting ever better decision making, but it should also enable innovation in new products, but innovation also in regulatory science. And finally, there was some of the stakeholders wanted to emphasize the important role of the regulatory optimization group, and I would echo that here today. If we go to the next slide, some comments that went outside, were considered outside the remit. Again, back to EHDS implementation, and then also there is the finalization of the EU pharma legislation, or the new pharmaceutical legislation, as some call it, and I think it's probably worth saying that the design, and maybe our co-chairs may want to pick this up at the beginning of the discussion, but the whole idea of the network strategy to 2028 was, if you like, the bridge to the time when the new pharma legislation is in operation. But clearly we need to design digitalization and our new ways of working and our data transformation with the new legislation very much in our minds. So I think that's worth acknowledging. And finally, there were some specific references, for example, identification of medicinal products, FHIR, IRIS, so different data standards, different technologies and different tools. If we go to the next slide, we're on the third, goal 3, so the last of the 3 goals. We're nearly there, chairs. This is artificial intelligence. On the left-hand side, you have the goal itself: realize the network vision on AI across all EMANS focus areas. So this is not just a silo within theme 2. This relates to all the different theme areas, AI as an enabler for efficiency and an enabler for better decisions. So the 2 specific objectives on the right-hand side: leverage experimentation and technological advances in AI to support the digital business transformation of the EU network and harness the potential of AI throughout medicine's life cycle. We go to the last slide in my section. These are some general comments which we will consider in implementation. And just to say, I think everybody on this webinar will be aware that we published about 14 months ago, the first ever multi-annual AI work plan. It was an HMA, EMA work plan, ambitious and forward-looking. We're currently going through a review of that under the auspices of the Network Data Steering Group. So these bullet points and these comments that I'll highlight now will be taken into consideration in that context. So firstly, strict and transparent governance and safeguards, also for building trust, plan for addressing bias, clear guidance, independent oversight. That's actually a bit of a potpourri of different comments. So the safeguards is about, well, firstly, compliance with the AI Act and legislation, taking a risk-based approach, but also clear guidance for the regulators, guidance for the industry, and having oversight. The point on bias is a specific point where some of the stakeholders believe we actually need specific how to deal with bias in your use of AI, for example, in drug development. So that comment came through. Regularly revisit plans due to rapid developments. So we'll do at least a yearly review of our AI work plan. Consider resource implications, aim to include efficiency gains and capacity building. So efficiency gains is one of the objectives of using AI. Capacity building in order to support industry and be able to give really good advice during drug development, but also in interpreting data that's been where AI has been used in its generation, is very much a priority for the European Medicines Regulatory Network. Consider centralization and avoid overlaps of effort. So a reasonable comment. Particular importance of stakeholders, cooperation and transparency. So I can say now we will continue to have regular meetings with the spectrum of different stakeholders, building on the successful yearly workshops that we've had over the last couple of years. Consider application of innovative development approaches without or with limited use of animals. So I do believe there is great promise of AI to advance the 3Rs approach in terms of drug development and reducing animal studies. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that as a potential area for further work. Consider extensive pharmacovigilance data. There's no doubt there's some very, very low-hanging fruit in terms of AI and pharmacovigilance. Implementation of the Artificial Intelligence Act is a legal obligation on all of us. And the first provisions came in 2 weeks ago, prohibiting certain, prohibited uses of AI. Consider starting with low-risk medicines. That's an interesting idea. And I think the whole point is, if we're going to experiment, have a risk-based approach to experimentation, do something firstly in a lower risk area, and then extend. Now, that's obviously not just about low-risk medicines. It might be low-risk procedures, low-risk data, etc. And then finally, explore also for post-approval CMC changes. The final comment, and therefore my final comment, an offer was made to cooperate with a group of stakeholders with supervisory role in a related area. Co-chairs, that was a bit dense, but hopefully clear. Thank you very much indeed. And I think, sorry, I need to hand over now to Joanna Nuevo for theme 3. Joanna.
Thank you very much, Peter. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm Joanna Nuevo. I'm the head of the Innovation Office and National Scientific Advice Unit within the Spanish Agency of Medicines and Medical Devices. And I'm also the Spanish representative of the European Innovation Network. Now it's my pleasure to present the theme 3, Regulatory Science, Innovation and Competitiveness. As lead of the theme, together with Maria Lamas, Executive Director of the Spanish Agency. But I also want to thank Emmanuel Cormier, Jordi Torrent, Falk Eman from the EMA, and Amapola Cámara from the Spanish Agency as members of the theme 3 drafting group. The goals, objectives, and actions included within this theme are oriented towards helping improving innovation and competitiveness in the EU health sector. And today we want to present the proposed modifications after taking into consideration the responses received from the stakeholders after public consultation. So in the next slide, includes potential changes to the goals, to the objective, and also to the narrative included in the text of the EMANS strategy for 2028, as I've mentioned before, after being out for public consultation. Regarding the changes in the narrative of the strategy, it will be specifically mentioned to foster the dialogue and communication among the different stakeholders, which was already pointed out within the STARS project, but there is still a lot to do on this matter. And related the changes to the goals and the objectives, I'll describe the proposed changes within the next slide when I'll go through the different goals and objectives to make it more clear. Next slide, please. And this slide includes a summary of the actions that we would like to implement after the public consultation. Within the goal to foster the knowledge of the different stakeholders on regulatory requirements, we will continue developing and updating the guidelines for the different procedures. We also acknowledge the need to include the patients within the different procedures. So we suggest also promoting their inclusion, for example, within the different scientific advices, including the simultaneous national scientific advice or the national. We also take on board the suggestion to promote the uptake on real-world data and also the patient-reported outcomes. The new clinical trial regulation came into force during last year together with the CTIS, but we also see the need to perform some improvements on CTIS and foster the use of real-world data. On this regard, EMA and HMA through ACT-EU and CTCG, for example, are already working on these improvements. We also agree on putting in place improved mechanisms to prevent ethical and financial waste, for example, the pre-grant advice, to make sure that the funding projects comply with the regulatory requirements from the beginning and the researchers use the budget wisely. We very much agree with fostering innovation effectively and that regulatory guidance and flexible pathways should be made available. Therefore, actions are already included in the European Innovation Work Plan for this year. We also agree on the need to increase the alignment among member states. That's why we have within the European Innovation Network, for example, the borderline classification group, and this alignment is really needed for borderline cases. Next slide, please. Here, I present you the first goal, which is promote the integration of advancing science and technology in medicines development and manufacturing. And it also shows their 3 objectives. Regarding the goal, after reviewing some of the comments received, we would suggest to include the promotion of future-proofing of the EU innovation ecosystem by monitoring and also, as if mentioned in here, integrating of advances science and technology in medicines development and manufacturing. The first objective is continue to support innovation and the integration of scientific and technological advancements in the development of human and veterinary medicines. And we will try not only to do it, but also do it in a timely manner. And the objective 2, in collaboration with other EU bodies, we want to implement a model for efficient, timely and coordinating EU horizon scanning for human and veterinary medicines that address the needs of regulators, HTA bodies and payers, supported by digital tools and artificial intelligence. And after the public consultation, we suggest not to specify all actors in order to avoid the lengthy action, but make sure that we will mention enable rapid adaptation to scientific and technological developments, the developments of regulatory tools and approaches, and also, and really important, identify areas where additional expertise is needed. And related, the third objective, facilitate the implementation of novel manufacturing technologies and analytical techniques. We would also like to extend it also to support the competitiveness of the biomanufacturing sector. So that was all related with the goal 1 and the 3 objectives. Within this slide, in order to achieve the mentioned goal and objectives, and also taking into account the comment received from the public consultations, we want to include the following actions. The regulatory guidance should be updated timely to reflect innovative technologies and remove ineffective methods. Improved mechanisms are needed to stay updated with changes and regulatory updates to prevent ethical and financial waste. For example, the pre-grant advice already mentioned previously. And we also need regulatory guidance and flexible pathways to support small and mid-sized companies in integrating advancements, ensuring robust and efficient development processes. Regarding the goal 2, which is foster generation of high quality and impactful evidence with particular focus on clinical trials, after reviewing all the comments received by you, we would like to include the following changes. For the first objective, support the generation of high quality evidence in quality, non-clinical and clinical domains by researchers and sponsors from early development stages and provide timely scientific and regulatory advice. Here, for the non-clinical evidence, we also suggest including evidence from non-animal models. For the second objective, foster innovation and improve planning and conduct of clinical trials and emerging clinical data generation, we suggest taking also into consideration the integration of real-world data. For that, we will work really closely with Theme 2. And for the third objective of this goal, leverage non-clinical models and 3R's principles and optimize capabilities in modeling, simulation, and extrapolation in collaboration with other EU initiatives and institutions, we need to assure that the approaches are internationally aligned. Next slide, please. In this slide are gathered some comments that we will take into consideration to develop some actions related to this goal and their objectives. Several comments request greater support for non-animal models, as they consider the strategy take it as light approach. And we think that non-clinical models aligned with the 3Rs are included in Objective 6, and specific actions will be considered in alignment with 3Rs working plan. Nevertheless, a progressive gradual transition is for sure envisaged. We also receive comments related to enhancing the clinical trials ecosystem, clinical trial harmonization requirements, and CTIS improvements. And we all agree with these statements, and references are made to ACTU and CTCJ, who are already working on them. Therefore, that's why a goal and objective focus on clinical trials are included in this theme, and concrete actions will be discussed and developed. And finally, the goal 3 within this theme is promote the stakeholders' cooperation to accelerate the translation of innovative into therapies, facilitate the repurposing of existing therapies, and increase EU competitiveness. And the objectives are as follows. The first objective of this goal is to develop network-led partnerships with key stakeholders, for example, academia, industry, to deliver impactful progress in regulatory science and provide training. And after the public consultation, we would like to extend it and including also the funding bodies, together with academia and industry, since it's highly demonstrated that only involving all actors will make the progress of innovation possible. Regarding the second objective, enhance the regulatory competence of researchers and developers from academia, hospitals, and small and medium-sized enterprises to facilitate the translation of research into innovative medicines through direct support and pre-competitive research collaboration. And the third objective of this goal, increase collaboration with all stakeholders, medical device experts, notified bodies, ethics committees, patient communities, ethics bodies, also other actors from other regulatory backgrounds, such as Substance of Human Origin Network, in conjunction with the European Commission to support the development and authorization of combination products. We consider that there are really well explained within this strategy, and we are not considering, or we don't consider that changes would be needed after these public consultations. Some comments received within this goal and this objective were related to transparency. And even if we always pursue transparency within all our procedures, we will, of course, try to put in place action to assure the transparency also within the public-private cooperation. During the public consultations, we've also received, as happened with our colleagues within the other themes, comments outside of the remit of the medicine agencies. For example, different comments we received highlighting opportunities in the ongoing pharmaceutical legislation revision, with some claiming that certain provisions are not ambitious enough. And on this regard, we would like to inform you that the strategy could be updated once the legislation comes into force. And within this theme, we've also received other comments related to the network capacity, capability, the stakeholders are concerned about this. And this is already reflected within theme 6, as you will see on the next minutes. And there are already ongoing activities in PORESnet, UNTC, and ongoing effort to enhance the network capacity, and the system efficiency. So we really hope that with these proposed changes, we are covering the majority of the comments received. Nevertheless, we have time now for questions, comments, or suggestions. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon again. I think we can restart the webinar. So welcome back to everyone. It's my pleasure now to introduce the speakers to this second session that will be covering the themes 4 to 6 of the strategy. Before I do that, I would like to start by thanking all those in the different teams for all the work that has been done in this context. And I will start by introducing then the speakers. So we will have team 4, which is focusing on antimicrobial resistance and other health threats, preparing the EU for potential threats, including antimicrobial resistance. And the speaker here will be Thomas Eberer, who is the head of the department at the BVL in Germany, that is in charge of the authorization of veterinary medicines. Then we'll have team 5, which is covering the availability and supply, strengthening availability of medicines to protect the public and animal health. And the speaker here will be Monica Diaz, and Monica is head of supply and availability of medicines and devices at the EMA. Then we will conclude the presentations with team 6, which covers the sustainability of the European Medicines Agency's network, ensuring available resources to support the scientific and regulatory decision making. And here the speaker will be Sindri Christiansen from the HNA and the Islamic Medicines Agency. So I give now the floor to Thomas. Thomas, please.
Thank you so much, Rui. Thank you so much for your kind introduction, and thank you so much for having me. And to have the chance to give the presentation on theme 4, antimicrobial resistance and other health threats, with the underlying overall perspective, preparing EU for potential threats, including antimicrobial resistance. First of all, I'd like to thank my co-leads. It's Marco Cavalieri from EMA and Zoltan Konsagi, also from EMA. And of course, I just want to mention Barbara Freischem, who left EMA, but she was giving so much input and so valuable input. And of course, I'd like to thank again all the 6 colleagues from EMA and HMA who did the analysis of all the after the consultation phase, with all the comments that have been provided. And for theme number 4, it was especially Daniel Freudel, who was just supporting us in putting everything together and just to give this presentation right now to you. Next slide, please. Thank you so much. So first of all, some general considerations. So we have 2 potential changes to the goals, objectives or narrative of the strategies. They are listed right here. First is explicit reference to terms of the marketing authorization in context of objective for developing additional options for guiding prescribing practices. This is objective number 2. And second is includes the example of vaccines as an alternative to use of antimicrobials, which is an objective number 6. So of course, we consider vaccines as very important, but we probably failed yet to include it very precisely into the general overall strategy. And I think it's very necessary at this point, even though it's just a high-level strategy at this point. Next slide, please. So starting with goal number 1, and you will realize that we have overall 13 objectives in this theme 4. So for goal number 1, we have 4 objectives. So it's called responsible use of antimicrobials in general, or more definitely, more precisely, contribute to responsible use of antimicrobials and effective antimicrobial stewardship using a One Health approach. So we have, as I mentioned, 4 objectives, which are listed right here. First is continue to implement the requirements for the mandatory collection and reporting of sales and use data for antimicrobials in animals, and for improving access to information and data on and communicating the findings, which is also realized already in the legislation 2019 number 6. Modernize the product information of existing antibiotics for veterinary use and consider additional options for guiding prescribing practices. For human medicines, take account of ongoing initiatives while incorporating relevant new provisions in the new pharmaceutical legislation. Number 3 is, in collaboration with relevant EU bodies, define a roadmap for point-of-care diagnostics to support the development of improved diagnostic tests. And number 4, develop, update, and promote regulatory guidance on antimicrobial use in animals to guarantee therapeutic options and minimize the impact of antimicrobial resistance, while also supporting the development, implementation, and uptake of guidance for human medicines. Next slide, please. So we received some comments on this, and we want to consider these comments, especially in the implementing actions and the implementation actions with the multi-annual working program. What we want to implement definitely is to align efforts with stewardship plans on the One Health approach, focus on the linkage between environment and health, enhance data collection and reporting of sales and use of antibiotics for animals, ensure access to data and information, maintain transparency, enhance surveillance system to monitor disease and AMR burden patterns. So we had also received other comments which are, of course, valuable and also I think very important. And these were, for instance, prevent, restrict, or ban the preventive overuse of antibiotics in agriculture or food-producing animals. So we think this is already covered in the legal framework, which is already in place. So we didn't want to implement it. So theme number 4, goal 2, it's the development of new agents, or specifically it's called support development of new antimicrobial agents and alternatives to the use of antimicrobials in collaboration with international partners. So here again, 4 objectives. Number 5, provide guidance on regulatory pathways of phage and other innovative products in human and veterinary medicine, engaging with relevant stakeholders. Number 6 is engage stakeholders in pipeline discussions with a view to facilitating the development and eventual authorization of relevant products. Number 7, provide systematic support to developers of new antimicrobials, including antibacterials and alternatives to the use of antimicrobials, mainly through the ETF, and for the veterinary medicines area through the Innovation Task Force, which is called ITF, and the Veterinary Medicine Scientific Advice Working Party. Number 8 is support the European Commission and the member states in the implementation of new business models for antimicrobials, particularly antibiotics, including eligibility assessment. So next slide, please. So from this goal, we received several comments, and we also want to consider some of these comments and proposals in the implementation actions. For instance, communicate clearly about the prudent use of treatments, especially for AMR, better training for healthcare professionals on the prescription and dispensation of antimicrobials, health literacy training. So we discussed it very intensively also already with the NTC steering group, and the role of agency on eligibility of medicinal products for voucher pull incentives, technical support to additional pull incentives to be piloted, such as subscription mechanisms, and the last one, interaction with HTA bodies on defining value of new antibacterial agents. We also received other comments where we think that they have already been addressed or covered somehow. First was transferable voucher, which is already covered in our point of view, standardize regulatory requirements and support to developers, which is also already covered. Role of EPI mentioned regularly and covered in other theme areas too, as will be shown later on, or has already been shown. And the last point is something that we also wish, but we got to see what's happening. And new antibiotics for veterinary use, as you can imagine, as head of a veterinary agency, I would really like to have new antibiotics. We got to see if it's really realistic somehow. Next slide, please. So coming to goal number 3, preparedness for health threats. As you know, it's not only about antimicrobial resistance, but also to strengthen the regulatory preparedness for health threats. And here we have 5 objectives. Objective number 9 in this case is refine regulatory activities to increase preparedness and harmonize approaches for investigating medicinal products during emergencies, including for conducting timely clinical trials during emergencies. Number 10 is respond to health threats that could be related to climate and environmental changes, using the One Health approach as defined by the OHHLEP, when applicable and in close collaboration with other union agencies. Number 11 is to expand the international alignment on regulatory requirements from a quadrilateral agreement to achieve more global consensus. And number 12, adopt necessary regulatory flexibilities to support the development and authorization of countermeasures for use in emergencies, including those caused by chemical, biological, radiation, and nuclear threats. Number 13, the last one, is to explore ways to better inform the public about medicines for health threats to engender trust in the medicines and the regulatory system. Next slide, please. So again, we received several comments that need to be considered within the implementation actions. First is to support to possible incentives for vaccine development, very important. Ensure clear communication to inform the public about the role of vaccines, to invest in strategies to ensure accurate information is shared with the general public in order to counteract false information, especially during emergencies. You know, this is a very important issue, not only in our area, to have strategies against such false claims or false information. Foster establishment of clinical trial networks, streamline regulatory pathways in emergencies and in preparedness. And the last one is awareness of AMR in package and product leaflet. So there was also another statement, which is, in our point of view, outside the remit of medicines agencies, and this was to work towards common solutions on depolluting environment from pharmaceutical products and to consider all factors to climate change. We absolutely believe that this is an important issue, but unfortunately, we have no real influence on this. So we are not in charge of this. But nevertheless, of course, we support any ideas and proposals in this direction. So I guess that's it. Thank you so much for your attention. And I'm handing over to Monica Diaz for the next presentation on availability and supply.
Thank you very much, Thomas. So we move now to theme 5. And first of all, I would like to mention that I'm presenting on the behalf of my HMA co-leads, Lorraine Nolan and Rui Santos, as well as my EMA co-leads, Peter Twomey and Janos Kovacs. And I would like to thank the work from the drafting group, in particular, Michael McDonald and Sandra Dang, but also Rita Bastos, Nuno Simões, Ana Rita Martins, Maria Alcalá, Tom Brusselman, and Brandon Cundy. And with this, I propose that we go through this theme. And if we move to the next slide, I would like to first highlight to you what are the main changes to our goals, objectives, or indeed if there are changes to the narrative of the strategy. So based on the wealth of comments that we receive from you, and we're very grateful for your time in putting together a number of comments in relation to the whole strategy, but now in this case in particular to theme 5. And we believe that goal 1, objective 4, and I'll go through it in the next slide, will need to be rewarded in order to make sure that that objective focus on a need for a balanced communication on shortages to avoid public concern, but also potentially patient-led stockpiling that sometimes happens in case of communication on shortages. Now, there have been also comments in relation to theme 5 that would ask us to adopt a more robust One Health approach in the document, and better integrating veterinary medicines more comprehensively and enhancing measures for emerging disease preparedness. Now, we believe that, and this was mentioned at the start of this webinar, that the One Health approach needs to be implemented as part of the narrative of the strategy, and that is what we will implement. Now, I want to first focus on actions that will be taken as part of the implementation based on the comments that were put forward by all of you. So when it comes to availability of human medicines, I think your comments show that we should continue with our mission to progress the ongoing activities, very much focusing on mitigation, but also prevention of shortages. Now, if we move on to veterinary medicines, what we would like to stress, and also based on your comments, is that we need to really fully understand the extent of the shortage issue for veterinary medicines before we put any actions, or we start taking any actions. This is very much in line with the outcome of the breakout session on availability of veterinary medicines, which took place during the workshop, the EMA workshop on shortages in March 2023. And what I can tell you already is that indeed the Veterinary Strategy Focus Group and the Federation of Veterinarians of Europe are already looking at the extent of shortage issues for veterinary medicine. So this is already work in progress. Now, if we focus of goal 2, here we see support to continue with a risk-based inspection approach, which includes, for instance, the use of alternative inspection models, and also the need to keep GMP guidelines updated and harmonized, in particular taking into account new technologies in manufacturing. Next slide. So I will go now through each of the objectives. And here we're focusing on goal 1, which is to strengthen the availability of medicines to protect public and animal health. So in objective 1, we are going to identify specific root causes of shortage for human and veterinary medicines and develop harmonized strategies to improve prevention and management of shortages, particularly for critical medicines. And I think here, if we see, is really the focus on prevention and management of shortages, but with a focus on critical medicines. And this really follows very well from the work that was done by the EMA task force on availability of authorized medicines. And we've published a union list of critical medicines, as you know, in December 2023, which has just been updated in December of 2024. Now, in addition to that, we will, in objective 2, improve coordination of activities related to improving availability of human medicines and implementing best practices in conjunction with stakeholders and international partners. So here, again, best practices very important to move forward, but in conjunction with the US stakeholders and also with international partners. Then we will work with the European Commission to coordinate national and EU strategies for human medicines, including stockpiling, to reduce the possible impact of national measures on availability of medicines in other countries. And the last objective is improving transparency and communication on both launch of medicinal products, but also on shortages with relevant stakeholders, including patients, healthcare professionals, and HTA bodies. And this is the objective I mentioned that we will amend in order to have that element of the balance communication. Next slide, please. So now if we go into more detail on comments that we received from you and that will be considered in implementation actions. But I think what I would like also to mention is many of the activities and many of the comments that we received relate to activities that indeed are already ongoing, but we will continue to progress. And it was very important to receive those comments for you because it stressed the importance of already the already ongoing work. And that, for instance, relates to harmonization of the implementation of the shortage definition. So the shortage definition has been agreed already in 2019 and is now part of regulation 22/123. So we have an agreed definition of shortage in the legislation, but we're working towards the harmonization of the implementation of that definition throughout the European Union. And that, of course, part of that is a proportionate and risk-based approach for shortage management. Now, a new element, a new mechanism is the voluntary solidarity mechanism that was established under the MSSG. And certainly we welcome your comment and will continue to facilitate that mechanism. In relation to application of regulatory flexibilities, again, a comment put forward. We will continue indeed the application of regulatory flexibilities, and perhaps important to mention that that is part of the MSSG toolkit on recommendations on tackling shortages of medicinal products. So again, this is already a work in progress, and I think important to refer to the MSSG toolkit, the toolkit that actually describes what are those possible regulatory flexibilities. Now, there was also reference to IT systems, and in particular to the European Shortage Monitoring Platform that, as you know, has been launched at the end of January. And here the comment was in relation to exploration further data exchanges between the SMP and other IT systems. So really very much addressing the need for interoperability. And I think I want to mention that as part of the MVP, there was launched, as I mentioned, at the end of January of this year, the platform. We have already planned for March and April the release of APIs, so the application programming interfaces, to ensure interoperability for national competent authorities and also for MAHs. So just to say that there is work in progress when it comes to interoperability, and we understand the importance of integrating the SMP with other sources of data. Now, I think the interoperability with IT systems, in particular with IT systems at national level, that will certainly help us towards avoidance of duplication in shortage reporting. So we understand and we welcome that comment. And last but not least, reporting of shortages at patient level. This is something that's already happening in a number of countries, and through the sharing of best practices, we believe that that can be extended to many more countries within the European Union. Next slide, please. Now, there were a number of slides, as for all other themes, that there were a number of comments that were really outside the remit of the Medicines Agency. And I think in the case of theme 5, I think very understandable many issues related to the revision of the pharmaceutical package. And indeed, the discussions are ongoing at the level of the Council and started with Chapter 10. So very understandable that we received these comments related to the Union list of critical medicines, but also in relation to the scope for shortage prevention and mitigation plans, also in relation to shortage reporting requirements, or indeed the use of EPI, and the need for us to strengthen regulation of supply chains, also addressing reshoring, reduction of dependence on third countries. So some of these elements either linked with the pharma package or indeed other EU policy initiatives such as the Critical Medicines Alliance, but also some comments related to existing legislation, for instance, comments relating to public health crisis activities that are indeed addressed under EMA's extended mandate regulation 22/123. And I think, as mentioned for other themes and as an overarching comment, also considerations in relation to pediatric medicines. Now, there were other comments that we welcome and indeed support our some of our activities, such as, for instance, the fact that stakeholders believe that there needs to be a significant increase in the role of EMA in preventing and addressing shortages. And I think that is indeed the case and started very much with EMA's extended mandate. Also, from your side, you welcome the strong focus on addressing medicine shortages and strengthening security of supply. So certainly EMA and national competent authorities are working towards the right direction. Next slide, please. So now I move to goal 2, and this is supply chain. So here we want to reinforce the oversight and protection of the supply chains and increase inspector capacity. So the first objective here is to ensure that we have sufficient number of trained inspectors continuously available to perform legal duties. And of course, there is here a link with the next theme 5 on sustainability of the network. Now, I already mentioned the use of risk-based inspection planning or alternative inspections methodology and collaboration with international partners to better target oversight of the supply chain, including for key finished product and API manufacturers. We have also an objective in relation to strengthening monitoring and oversight of the supply chain to prevent entry of falsified human medicines in the supply chain, and keep good manufacturing practices requirements updated in light of technological progress in manufacturing, such as, for instance, in relation to digital AI and other technological systems. And last but not least, again, in relation to databases, improving the interlink information in current databases, such as the UDRA GMDP. Next slide, please. So let's see what are the, based on your comments, what actions will be part of the implementation. Suddenly, we see the need towards a harmonization of interpretation of EU guidance, GMP guidance. So this very much in line with for goal 1, the need for harmonization of the interpretation of implementation of the definition of shortage. So we see here a continuous need towards harmonization. Now, also based on your comment, we understand that we need to expand the data provided by member states in UDRA GMDP, so that that will be part of the implementation actions, and we need to monitor learnings from MRA partners. We also need to ensure that we develop standards that will enable a new technology to be implemented by industry. Next slide, please. Now, there were some comments also outside the remit of medicines agencies, and in the case of goal 2, that was a comment relating to expanding MRA agreements for vaccines and plasma-derived products, or ATMPs, and indeed this is in the remit of the European Commission and not an activity that can be undertaken by regulatory agencies. There were other comments as well that, for instance, related to the need for relocation, supply chains and production. Again, this is more in the context of other activities, such as the Critical Medicines Alliance, so an initiative under the European Commission. There was also a comment that referred to the need to step up EMA's global presence, but it was really difficult to understand in what exactly actions should be put in place. Also a comment focusing on illegal supply chain that is already addressed by the Falsified Medicines Directive. Also comments that related to, in a way, support and commitment from stakeholders in promoting access to safe medicines, raising awareness about the dangers of unlawful medicines and combating unsafe medicines. So it was very, very important to see that as also a commitment from your side, from the side of stakeholders. And last but not least, also a comment in relation to few incentives that are available for companies to transition to manufacturing processes in line with EU standards, and also questions on how the we proceed with the implementation of the EU Green Deal legislation that brings increased requirements for companies to transition away from existing processes. So I think in a nutshell, those were the other comments also that were that we received for goal 2. And I think with this ends my presentation. So I now give the floor to the next presenter. Sindri, over to you.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Monica, and thank you, Rui, for the introduction. As stated, my name is Sindri Kristjánsson, and from the Icelandic Medicines Agency, or IMA, and I will today be representing the team responsible for working on theme 6 of the strategy, sustainability of the network. I would like to begin with acknowledging my team members, Ms. Runa Hauksdóttir Kvanberg, Director of IMA and HMA Lead for theme 6, Mr. Alberto Ganan Jimenez from EMA and EMA Lead, Mr. Juan Garcia Burgos from EMA, and finally, my colleague at the AMA, Jana Rós Reynisdóttir. Being last but not least of the themes presented today, I will try to keep this direct, short and sweet, so we can all get to the Q&A and discussions, which I'm quite sure everybody is eager to get to. Next slide, please. Maybe just a few words on theme 6 in general to begin with. Theme 6 is about ensuring the sustainability of the European Medicines Agency network. This theme is crucial for maintaining the capacity and capability of our network to support scientific and regulatory decision making. On your slide, on your screens right now, you can see, following the same format as the speakers before me, we have some general considerations for theme 6. The potential changes to the goals, objectives of narratives of the strategy that we are looking on have to do with further reference to environmental sustainability, including knowledge management in the scope of digital transformation, an explicit reference to AI being in the scope of potential shared initiatives, including support for regulatory systems of EU candidate countries, and reinforcing the wording on stakeholder engagement. To be considered in the implementing actions, we have identified the following: using revised regulatory fees for increasing the number of well-trained assessors, call for improved resourcing, training, and streamlined processes, automation, and efficiency. Next slide, please. So what I will do is that we will go through using the same methodology as the other speakers. Goal 1 under theme 6 is to reinforce the scientific and regulatory capacity and capability of the network. Our objectives include supporting innovation and the use of new methodologies, AI, and data analytics. This ensures that we are equipped for the new pharmaceutical legislation. Improving efficiency by creating centers of excellence and strategically allocating NCA resources. This helps us optimize our resources and expertise. And building the network's capability for digital transformation. This involves transforming our scientific and regulatory processes, ways of working, and tools. And by achieving these objectives, we aim to enhance our network's ability to support innovation and maintaining high standards of regulatory science. Next slide, please. So here you can see what our team has gathered from the consultation process regarding Goal 1. I won't go through them all, but I want to bring special attention to the first point on the left side of the slide, where we are quite happy to consider further initiatives to facilitate use of external experts, use of specific research networks, and wider stakeholder cooperation to increase capacity and capabilities in specific areas of innovation. Just to name one example. Next slide, please. So here we have a little overview of Goal 2, which focuses on establishing a shared operating model to support network activities and collaborations. Here our objectives include, for human medicines, preparing the implementation of new legislation and modernizing IT systems, which ensures that we are ready for the upcoming changes and can operate efficiently. For veterinary medicine, aligning IT solutions across sectors, which promotes consistency and efficiency in our operations on the veterinary side. exploring opportunities for shared data, process, and technology initiatives, which helps us leverage synergies and improve collaboration, and implementing the new EMA fee regulation and monitoring the cost-based system for fees and NCA remuneration, which ensures financial sustainability and fair compensations. These objectives are essential for creating a cohesive and efficient operating model that supports our network's activities. Now, what you can see to be considered for implementation actions, we have compiled these points of interest to consider going forward. Highlighting a few, I would like to mention, especially considering the experience with digitalization of variations for veterinary medicines, lessons learned and best practices going forward, early onboarding of NCA, and regular monitoring and adjustment of the new fee regulation. Next slide, please. Now, regarding this goal, where there were a number of comments received that due to various factors are outside the remit of medicines agencies. And as is with goal 1, we have identified few comments that are already addressed in other themes or covered elsewhere. And you can see examples here on the slide regarding simplification and streamlining, which we considered already covered, emphasis of importance of the PMS, which we feel is addressed in theme 2, to name a few. Next slide, please. Here we have an overview of goal 3, our final goal. We aim to strengthen public and stakeholder engagement and global convergence with international partners. Here our objectives include enhancing capacity through international convergence, information sharing and multilateral cooperation, strengthening international cooperation for inspections and facing global challenges, supporting the establishment of the African Medicines Agency, which should foster cooperation between European, African, and international partners. And here I'd just like to mention that this perhaps meets the requirements raised regarding theme 5 that Monica mentioned before me. And finally, regarding goal 3, developing a framework for communication and engagement, which addresses the information needs of the public and counters misinformation. By focusing on these objectives, we aim to build a stronger relationship with our stakeholders and international partners, ensuring a unified approach to regulatory challenges. Next slide, please. Now, as you can see, as with the previous goals, we have identified a number of comments and inputs which we will consider going forward. Here, I would like to bring attention to the excellent points received regarding accessible communication in lay language, on the use of new sources of data and AI, strengthening communication channels, and improved predictability of regulatory updates, just to name a few of those that you can see on your screens. Next slide, please. Following the same approach as before, we want to highlight also an important comment received, but nevertheless a comment to be considered outside the remit of Medicines Agency regarding legislative changes for single global development of patent medicines. And as with the other goals, we have identified a few comments that are already addressed in other themes or covered elsewhere, which are presented in the slide deck. Finally, I would just, like the other presenters before me, on behalf of Team 6, would like to convey our sincere and most gratitude to all of you for your input during the public consultation. The input received is of utmost value, and we hope sincerely that we have done a sufficient job of incorporating the feedback into the strategy theme. I would just like to end with this, since I see a number of NCA colleagues in the audience. This will be my final contribution to the work of building the strategy to 2028, as I have moved positions within my organization. I wish my colleagues all the best in the future of the project. It is in the most capable hands. And from here, I say thank you and hand the floor back over to Rui. Thank you all.
So we will now go to the conclusion of the webinar with the closing remarks that will come from our co-hosts. And I see already Maria. So we will have first Maria Lamas, who is the head of the Spanish Medicines Agency of Medical Devices. And she's the chair of the Heads of Medicines Agencies Management Group, and Maria will intervene on behalf of the HMA. Then Maria will be followed by Jürgen Krug, who is the executive director of the EMA, and then we will conclude the closing with Marcin Kolakowski, who is the Vice President of the Polish Office of Registration of Medicinal Products, Medical Devices, and Biocidal Products. And Marcin will, of course, close this webinar under the Polish presidency, which I take the opportunity also to thank for hosting it, and thank all the colleagues in Poland for all the work they are also doing now during the presidency. So now this is my last word, and it's my pleasure to really give the floor to Maria. Maria, please, have the floor.
Thank you, Rui. It's been a quite active webinar, I think, and it's very good because this shows how interesting this strategy is and the interest that has awakened among our stakeholders. So my first idea here is to thank all the work done so far by the drafting teams, by the coordinators, by the topic leaders. Thank you, all of you from HMA, from EMA. I have to say that it's a pleasure, this way of work sharing. I love to do this kind of projects and strategy all together, all the minds together, all the brains together make the difference. And I have to also to appreciate all the contributions from stakeholders. Physicians and vets and pharmacists, healthcare providers, patients, consumers, industry, researchers, other institutions and bodies. Your contributions have been carefully reviewed, considered, and some of them have indeed enriched the document, enriched the strategy. And we have seen that your average rating was very high, above 4. That means that you considered all the goals and all the themes important or very important, and it meant that we were in the right direction. But I think that with your contributions, we have right now a much better strategy. So thank you very much for your contributions, for helping us to have this strategy, which at the end of the day serves to the society, not to the regulatory network. So that's why your contribution is so needed and so welcome. And with this, my last message is that our next steps is to adopt this strategy, which we will do in March, and then we will have our strategy alive, ready to work on it. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to HMA to address these closing words, and to wish you all the best for the rest of the day. Bye.
Good afternoon, everybody. I think it's up to me now to speak for a few minutes. Thank you very much for all your contribution to this wonderful webinar. A special thank you to Rui and to Thomas for leading the program, but now to Maria for so eloquently summarizing what an important webinar this has been and the outcomes of today. Let me extend my gratitude to all of you for joining us here. Your insights and feedback are invaluable in helping us refine the strategy. And as Maria said, this is about serving the needs of European patients and all of our stakeholders. It's not about serving the regulatory network, it's about serving the public. Regarding the next steps for the EMANS to 2028, we will carefully review and integrate key adjustments based on your input today. And we're confident that these refinements will further strengthen its impact as we work to enhance the effectiveness of our network. As just mentioned, the strategy is planned for adoption by both the Heads of Medicines Agency and EMA's Management Board in March 2025, and this will be the final adoption will be a crucial milestone in this collaborative effort. Once it's adopted, the final strategy will be published on the EMA and HMA websites, and it will mark the beginning of the implementation phase through our respective multi-annual work plans. I am I want to reassure you that the EMA, the Heads Medicines Agency, and the national competence authorities are committed to working closely to ensure a smooth and effective rollout. In closing, let me thank the theme leads and their teams, the drafting group, the analysis team, and all the colleagues from across the network who have worked on this important strategy. And thank you to our stakeholders, those who have joined in the virtual room today or who have followed the online broadcast, and all of you who have taken the time to review the strategy and provide feedback. We truly appreciate your engagement, expertise, and commitment to this process. Your contributions are shaping a stronger, more forward-looking strategy, and we look forward to implementing this together. Thank you very much.
Okay, so now it's my time. I would like to join Maria and Imer in thanks all speakers and participants for their commitment and of course your presence here, which shows that it's a very important topic. I would like also thank especially moderators for their great job, perfect job here. I really appreciate discussions and importance of the issues raised by the participants. There are many very important issues, but one which is very close to my heart is models without animals in testing. I like it very much, and I really support that idea and that initiatives. We know the calendar of the document, and it's a great pleasure that finalization and adoption will be during the Polish presidency. It's also very important for us. So it was honor for Polish presidency to be co-host of this webinar, and I can officially declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much, all participants, speakers. Thank you very much once again.